Today on Queen Me, we are talking about something that impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not. How our systems actually work and who they are really built for. Beth Simone Noveck is a government technology expert professor at Northeastern University and someone who has spent her career inside and alongside institutions trying to make them better. From the White House to advising governments around the world, she has seen how decisions get made at the highest levels. Her new book, Reboot: AI and the Race to Save Democracy, makes a strong argument. Democracy is not broken, it has just not been kept up. This conversation is about what happens if we stop treating democracy as something fixed and start treating it as something we can redesign. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I so appreciate, your time and being here with us. So thank you. Of
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
course. I always like to start with, a bit about, your career journey and just your roles now. So before we dive into anything, I would just love to hear a little bit about, your story and really how you got to this point, about writing your new book and, what maybe some people should know about your journey.
Well, it might be helpful to understand if I go back. I promise not to be too long-winded, but I'll go back quite a ways because it was what informed the writing of this book. And that is to say, when I was a student, I was a student of history, and I got to have the great experience of spending both a summer and then actually 2 years sitting in the coffee houses of Vienna. Because why not? That's the great part about going to school. And yes, wearing black and drinking coffee and, smoking the odd cigarette. But more importantly, looking at what happened in Europe in the 20s and 30s that led to institutions that succumbed to fascism. So we all know about Weimar Germany, same period in Austria, where we saw that these very fledgling, fragile democracies that emerged after World War I then essentially broke instead of bending. And other countries that have experienced similar kinds of sh economic shocks, they were more flexible and they withstood the shocks that the economy brought to them and that changes in gender roles and changes in society brought. It goes back a very long way, my interest in the question of what makes some democratic institutions break and others stand strong. And then you fast forward and overlay the time in which we live today. People are asking similar questions. Is this like the 1930s all over again? We're seeing similar fragility of our democracies, similar hyper-partisanship, a world in which more Americans would rather marry someone of a different religion than they would of a different political party. And so we have to ask the same questions. And also the genesis of the book is really trying to figure out what's happening at this moment in time, and more importantly, what can we do about it?
Absolutely. And I mean, you've worked in some of the most powerful institutions in the world, and I think what's interesting for me here as well is, when did you maybe realize that the issue was not just this policy, but the system itself, how the system itself was designed?
Yeah, it's a really good question because the word policy is a kind of funny, really nebulous
Mhm.
word, which I think for most people, I don't know what it means to most people, but I think, for some people, it sort of means legislation, passing laws, maybe making regulations. But I think of policy really as just being sort of the direction we're going to take to solve a problem. So when we're confronted with a challenge, whether it's climate change or the price of eggs or rising gas prices, decreasing life expectancy, rising costs of healthcare, fill in the blank, we've got a lot of challenges now that I think people are facing and that are depressing a lot of people. I think we're asking ourselves the question why we're not doing better at solving them, and why it is that the system itself is producing such, disagreement and rancor and hyper partisanship, and at the same time, so little efficacy. The democracy that we're so proud of and we're celebrating, this 250th anniversary event. that everybody is excited about, I think that celebration is a little bit dampened or muted because we're feeling like, maybe the promise of our democracy in this truly American experiment that has survived for so long, whether there aren't things we could do better to reimagine, to reinvent, to innovate, and just make the system work better. Because to have a system, a set of ideals that then doesn't translate into better outcomes for people's lives,
Mm,
that's where the disjuncture is, I think. So policy is only good insofar as you can actually implement it. In other words, it's when boots hit the ground. It's great to have an ideal, like here's how we should solve a problem, but actually you have to be able to solve a problem. Maybe this analogy is helpful. It's not enough to invent a vaccine. You actually have to put shots in people's arms.
mm,
And that's where the challenge comes in.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I'd love to think about too how you talk about reframing democracy because you argue that democracy is not broken, it's just not been kept up. So when we're talking about this, what are we getting wrong when we frame it as democracy is failing?
Well, I think when we talk only about democracy as failing, we create such despair for ourselves, such depression, such a sense of hopelessness. That's one problem. Is when I feel either that democracy, that somehow we've lost the game before we've started.
Mm,
I think that adds to the sense of voicelessness, of disempowerment, of disenchantment that we feel. So I want to make sure that we are not so despairing that we feel like we can't take action because we can. And my argument in the book is that these tools give us something unique and special that give us the ability to be more powerful if we use them well than we ever have been before. More so than the internet, more so than social media, more so than past technologies. There's much more we could do, and I'm happy to get into why that is. But I want to make sure that the despair isn't so complete and total,
mm,
that as is what happens when people feel things are not going well, they run headlong to the next politician promising them the world, whether that person is a populist or an authoritarian. We've seen in many countries and cultures the dangers of, uh, you know, populist messaging, that promises the world and delivers on none of it. But that's what comes of this sense of despair.
mm, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I saw a video the other day and it was from this woman that was speaking at an event and she was talking about how AI is the reason that, you know, in her words that democracy is failing and there's so many different opinions on this. There's a lot of, I think, of people that are just scared about what is happening. They don't know it well, they don't know all the things that are happening, but you describe AI as almost like this operating system for the government, and I would love for you to like walk us through this. So what does that actually change about how we make decisions every day? What about how you're viewing AI is going to help us when we're thinking about our democracy and how we make decisions as a society?
Yeah, 100%. So the great thing about AI, especially this newest generation of what, we've come to call generative AI or large language models. We've had AI, for some time now. But it's only now that this is software that is trained on words and that we can use it to do tasks involving words rather than just tasks involving numbers, that it's really come sort of into popular consciousness because you no longer need to be a number person. You no longer need to have a computer science degree to be able to drive these tools. They're driven by words and by plain language and plain not just English, but plain whatever language it is that you speak. But the great part about these tools is not just that they generate, as the name implies, I can go to ChatGPT and ask it, make me a poem or, come up with a recipe for me. One of my favorite things to do with it, take a picture of what's in my refrigerator and say, based on what's in my fridge, what should I have for dinner? A decision I do not want to make for the 10,000th time. Those things are great. What's really exciting, though, is the ability to synthesize, make sense of pick your word here, summarize large quantities of information. And I think that's what's so great about these tools. Let me give you a quick example. And this is an example I've been saving, especially for you, because
Great.
I don't know anybody else I can use it with, which is some work that we did in the state of New Jersey, where we set up a task force around AI and its impact on jobs. A
Mm,
lot of people asking, is this going to put people out of jobs? And we wanted to understand what's the latest, best research? What's the best thinking out there about this question? What's the research that's been done? What studies are out there, et cetera? If I wanted to hire a group of consultants to do that research for me, that could be $1 million price tag. It could also take a very long time for me to do that. So we used a set of AI tools that worked along the concept of ELO scoring, which I imagine is something you can explain better. And I'm going to let you do that. I'll tell you how it worked, and then you'll explain what ELO scoring is. Basically, we just used AI to do really, really rapid thousands and thousands and thousands of web searches, and then to analyze those web searches using ELO scoring. Can you figure out the connection to the policy space?
mm. Oh,
Do you
I
want to
love that.
explain the ELO scoring concept?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So for those that are in chess or in some esports, when we think about ELO scores, it's basically a mathematical formula to help calculate the skills of players. And so in chess, you start out at the base of 100 and you can work your way up based on how many matches you play, adjust your rating or your score. In chess, when we think about like your rating system, it's, what your ELO score is, whether it's, 700, 1,500. Magnus Carlsen right now, I think he's like 26 or 2,700, right? It's like you're building up your ELO score. And we talk about it in chess, though it can be used in esports. But I love this.
So we used it here because in the same way that in chess, your ranking, I guess, depends not just on how many matches you won, but who you won them against, sort of the how hard the match was. The idea here is to rank. You can give me a suggestion, a policy, a proposal, a solution to a particular problem around job displacement because of AI or a job retraining or whatever it is, but there isn't one right solution. It has to do with, am I looking for the cheapest thing? Am I looking for the fastest thing? Am I looking for something to help women? Am I looking for something to help low income people? So what the ELO scoring, what the AI does is essentially just automates the process of evaluating and scoring solutions against one another and gives you then a rank ordered list, a sort of ranking table, not of chess players, but in this case of research, saying, hey, here's the ideas you might like to look at first, second, and third. So we worked with a group that actually built these AI tools. They were free and open source, and it allowed us essentially to do very, very rapid research. With the time that we saved, not only did we have better research just from the web, from journals and articles and things like that, but with all the time we saved, we then had the resources to go out and ask other humans what they thought. So the AI saved us time on the paperwork, which then allowed us to go out and consult with several thousand, both government workers and then members of the public, doing this whole process of running this task force, coming up with policy solutions in a way that actually had more humanity in it because we used AI. Anyway, I wanted to get my chess example in
Oh, I love
there.
that chess example. That's perfect. That's perfect. And that's what I think at the core of this. I mean, we talk a lot about like, power and participation. I think a lot of people feel like that AI, concentrates their ability to, participate in society. But what you're talking about in your work is that, I mean, you can analyze the public at a large scale, right? So what I want to dive into now is just about your views on participation in AI, and how AI expands access, and maybe just your insight too on when people are trying to participate in democracy, right? Maybe before AI, how they couldn't, and how AI has shaped that or changed it.
Yeah, so I think we had a lot of high hopes, some of which were realized and others not, that with the advent of the internet, we'd be giving everybody a megaphone So yes, good news is we have podcasters. We have free speech rights and ability for so many more people. When I grew up, not to totally date and age myself, we had, CBS, NBC, ABC. Fox was the big innovation, and you got cable, but you still had a limited number of channels. So in other words, the power of who controlled the discourse, who got to speak, was held by a vanishingly small number of people. We still have a lot of those same issues with concentration and money and media and things like that, but we surely have given a megaphone to a much larger number of people. And whether it's podcasts or TikTok or YouTube, we have done a really good job of helping people to talk with the internet. My concern is that the more people talk, the harder it actually is to listen. As anybody knows who's ever done something like go to a town meeting, and suddenly, those meetings are always dominated by the most loudmouth people who do all the shouting, for example, and it becomes very hard to actually hear each other, and it becomes, increasingly hard for institutions, whether it's schools or it's our workplace or our governments, don't want to go out and do the asking because all I'm going to do is get yelled at. But even beyond that, it just is really, really hard to listen when people talk to you. So I worked for President Obama. One of the brilliant ideas, and you can't see that I'm making air quotes now, was to go out and ask people before he became president, what should be our policies? What should we do in the first 100 days of the Obama administration? And guess what? 125,000 suggestions is what we got. We heard from a very lot of people because we had a very large megaphone as the White House, or just before we entered the White House. And with 125,000 people, it was very, very hard for anybody to listen. Whoopsie, I'm just going to go back to the Zoom. There we go. Sorry. Um, I just wanted to make sure we were still there for a second. Little
Yeah,
glitch on my
absolutely.
end. So weren't able to do anything with those suggestions because we didn't have the bandwidth, we didn't have the tools. 125,000 comments. You can imagine of those 125,000, probably half of them were just people, sitting on the keyboard. But within there might have been really amazing ideas that we weren't able to use. So that's my concern about sort of the unrealized promise. And we could talk about sort of where we've gotten to now, but I definitely think it's one of the dangers we didn't anticipate is that with everybody talking, it gets really hard for people to listen. And in many cases, we have created sort of even more powerful gatekeepers than we had in the old days. Because of, the desperate need for curation, the desperate need for
Mhm.
somebody to help us make sense of all this just welter of information that's out there.
Absolutely. And I do want to talk about, where we are now. And as a part of that, I think that trust is, you know, very low when we think about institutions right now. And so when we talk about where we are now, I want to dive into too about ways that we can rebuild trust. But first I'll ask, what is the state of this now? What does that look like?
I think it's the same answer to both questions in some way. One of the reasons that trust is so low, I think there's two reasons trust is so low. One is our institutions are not as effective as we need them to be, right? They just don't work as well as we need them to. So, there's of course um, the metaphor of the sloth at the DMV that we're all pretty familiar with. And whereas your DMV has probably gotten better and you can do more things online, it just sort of is classic of how we think about government. When I say the word government bureaucracy, those words by itself just encapsulate everything you think of: waiting online, long waits. I filed an application now with an international government. I am now, or I'm between, I have passed 2 years in which I am waiting for a response. They managed to respond to me to tell me I will get a response in 2.5 years.
Oh my God. Oh
So in
my
the day and age
God.
when today I ordered Amazon is bringing me coffee, I ordered it this morning when I realized the cupboard was bare.
Mm,
I the coffee's coming in an hour, thank God.
right.
But the notion I'm waiting 2.5 years to get back a
Mm,
form from a government agency. Again, this one is outside the U.S., but it's when you hear now about the recent Supreme Court decision on rescinding temporary protective status. The only sort of good news about that is that no one thinks that they would even have the wherewithal to be able to deport people if they wanted to. We don't know how to do that quickly enough. If you are waiting in immigration court now, or you are waiting in court for to file whatever case it is or claim that you have, whether it's immigration or unemployment or something else, you can be waiting not just months, but years for your rights. It's the rape victim waiting for prosecution who then has to wait years only to learn that the prosecutor doesn't have the evidence that they need. So there are countless stories like this, and we've all experienced them of just government not working as well as it needs to, number one. And number two, us not having any voice in the process. So the fact that I get to vote once a year, once every 2 years, once every 6 years for Senate, it's a really very, very small amount of influence, if anything, and depending what state I live in, it may be almost no influence. And then you turn around and on TV see people who are trillionaires and billionaires with a seat at the dais, with a seat at the table, people who can afford to hire lobbyists. Anyway, I think the distrust comes from the lack of effectiveness and the lack of voice, despite the fact we talk about living in a democracy. And really, this is, better than most places, to be fair, but it is not living up to the promise of what it could be. And that's what's so exciting. So let me actually answer the question maybe more briefly now, but we can get into more specifics. This idea of everybody talking and no one listening. There are now places, let's take a few examples. In California, after the wildfires, they went out, the governor went out and asked people, what should we do differently? How should we rebuild? People were incensed, they were angry, they were upset, and needless to say, a lot of people commented. In the old days, in the like what I described before, they would have had a photo op, they would have printed out all the comments and said, thank you so much, and then done whatever they were going to do before. But because they had AI to help them synthesize, summarize, organize the information, they took 1,300 on-topic comments that they got, sorted it into 19 recommendations, turned those 19 recommendations into an action plan with 5 priorities that they're now moving forward on, like undergrounding power lines or streamlining permitting. I'll give you one more example outside the US. In Brazil, when they have a legislative hearing, so the things you see on TV where a congressman or a senator interviews a witness that you see on the news and they have testimony in front of a congressional hearing in the Senate in Brazil, which has a bigger legislature than ours. It's not a little country. It is equally complex and hyper-partisan and challenging. Every question that gets asked of a witness is written by the public. Now, allowing the public to submit questions would be extremely daunting if you're at the receiving end. If you're the sort of staffer or the intern having to take all of those questions and then sort them and give them to the senators to ask them, AI helps them match what's coming in to what the topic is, sort things that are relevant from those that are off topic, or maybe just someone again just banged on the keyboard and hit enter. They're able to do that work of sorting the information so that the public actually has a voice.
absolutely. So if you could change maybe one part of how democracy works tomorrow, what would you focus on first?
Since we're talking about it, I would focus on this institutionalizing participation. In other words, this idea of having a voice, the fact that in Brazil, there is not one, but 4 different ways that as a member of the public, I can participate. They still have legislators, they vote, they elect them, they serve in Congress, they do what our legislators do. This is not a wholesale reinvention where we're going to get rid of legislatures. There's maybe visionary things we want to do that are going to take some time. But right now, here, today, why is it that I cannot, for example, have a way to propose legislation? Why is it that I can't comment on legislation? Why is it that I can't submit a question to get asked of a witness? Why is it that I cannot call my member's office and actually interact with, get an answer to a question? It wouldn't be hard to make a chat bot again that maybe every constituent can't talk to the human legislator all the time, but I could begin to get answers to my questions more than I could do today, where now if I'm lucky if I can get through it all, and then I'm going to get a form letter written by an intern, who's a sophomore in college. Those are great people, but they are very beleaguered and overwhelmed. There is so much more that we can do. The idea that forget about the national level, at the state level, at the local level, we could be doing the same things, like what they're doing in the city of Boston, where they are now adding a feedback button on every single government service so that I can say, hey, this isn't working well. Here's how you could do it better. Again, not enough just to give people the megaphone to talk if no one's doing the listening. The great part is that with the AI tooling on the back end, they're not having you interact with a chatbot. You're not talking to an AI. They're not doing that. What they're doing is using the AI to help analyze again and then provide feedback on those responses. So they took all of the permit applications that were filed in Boston over the last 20 years, fed them into a piece of software and said, you know what? There's a set of questions that people, in the comments of your permit application, people write in the comments, I am renovating my bathroom or I am trying to add solar panels. They're able to read all those comments and go, gee, guess what? X% of the requests for permits are to renovate a bathroom. So maybe we should put a guide for renovating the bathroom on the website so that you have the information that you need. So this idea of government that is more conversational, more accessible, more responsive, and more engaged is, I think, what comes of using tools, again, not to substitute for human connection, but to just help institutions make sense of that overload of information.
Mm. I love that. Not to substitute, but to make sense and to work through it. And I think that is so key for people to understand. We still need the human connection. This is about the other tools that can help with efficiency and gathering and information. Um,
Exactly. And I think it does, if we realize the efficiency benefits, and has a lot to do with how we think about using these tools, then I have more time for the human connection. That's the hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My last question for you is what I ask at the end of every podcast that we do, and it's a fun one relating back to chess as well. What does it mean to unleash your inner queen, and how do you tap into that when you're working to reshape systems at this level?
Ooh, I really want to ask you what's the best qu answer you ever got to that question. I'm really I'm really curious. How do I release my inner queen and use it to reshape systems? Well, I think uh, besides ordering the coffee that's going to arrive today so that I can, my inner queen is a little under caffeinated at the moment to
Yes.
give you the best answer to this question. But I think the short answer is two things here. One is just to come back to the topic here is really learning what these tools are and what they can do for you in your life. One of the great dangers is we talk about a lot about AI will cost us jobs. AI will do this. AI will do that. AI doesn't do anything. It's a tool. It's how
Mm,
we use it, how we shape it. And so, whereas we do want to hold the companies that make these tools accountable, educating ourselves about what we can and can't do with them and thinking about how do we want to do good with these tools and how do we want to incorporate them into our own lives, I think is
mm,
so important. And it's a struggle. It still continues to be a struggle. When you realize what they can do, it becomes very tempting to say, ooh, I will let it write, the book for me. I will let it write the speech for me. I will let it, do XYZ for me. It's reclaiming our humanity in that to say, no, 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 it's still about my ideas. What do I want to say? And how do I use these tools so that they work for me instead of the other way around?
mhm.
So that's thing one. And thing two is having a public purpose. Public here, I don't mean government. I just mean something outside yourself, something good
Yes.
to do and beneficial to do in the world, whether it's teaching chess to kids
Mhm.
to help empower them and uplift them, or whether it's I work with young people building AI for social good, or whether it's volunteering in your community or cleaning up the park or doing something with your neighbors. I just think having something outside ourselves and our own immediate worries that is civic, that is about giving back to our community, especially in this day and age where we're so overwhelmed by issues and so many big despairing topics, the chance to really feel empowered is picking something that we can each do, something that I now think has gotten easier and could be easier and faster for us taking advantage of these tools. You might not have thought of, for example, running for office before, but if you realize that with AI, you could make your first campaign poster, you could make your first flyer, you could have a conversation with AI about, should I run for office? Is this a good
Yeah.
idea? You could help you do the research about what's happening in your community or what the issues are. So you want to think about this as suddenly having 1,000 interns.
Mm.
It's about as stupid as 1,000 interns. You don't want to let it think for you, but it does give you some superpowers that you might not have had. So if you're feeling despairing, or even just you want to feel really good, what I do is just try to wake up every day and think about um, when I'm done with my laundry and my bills and all the things I worry about for myself is what can I
Mm.
do for someone else and how might I take advantage of the tools to help me be more powerful.
I love it. I love it. This is incredible. Thank you so much. I'm so excited for people to read your book. We'll link everything. We'll make sure it's all included. But anything else that you want to share before we end today?
Oh, just if you're like me and you have no time to read and a stack of books next to your bed and you promise yourself you're not going to get another book until you read this one, it's also available as an audiobook.
Oh, I love that. Yay.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
You
That
can
is so
tell
helpful.
people, you can tell people you read it, but you can
Yeah.
still listen to it. And and it's not even narrated by me. There's some very British sounding dude
Wow.
who reads it quite nicely.
Oh, there you go.
Um, so yes, excellent.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining us, and we so appreciate your time and everything that you do.
Thank you so much. And you very much, very glad for the conversation. Appreciate it.